Hi, Nancy and Jan. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Hello. Thank you for inviting us.
Of course. Well, Jan is a returning guest. Nancy, we are so excited to have you on today. We are going to talk about your amazing book. The inspiration for this book was a very popular infographic that you created known as the Ladder of Reading and Writing. In the book, you shared that this infographic illustrates what we know from research, right? That learning to read and write in English is a complex process and it's influenced by many internal and external factors. And because of this complexity, instruction can't be one size fits all. So, for our listeners who can't see, because this is a podcast, the ladder of reading and writing, I'm going to ask Nancy, would you mind just kicking us off by describing what they would see if they looked at an infographic?
All right. Thank you for permitting me to share this. And just checking, you'll probably have a link in the notes so people can go to my website.
That's right.
So I
And for
do
the book as well.
Okay, great. So
Yeah.
I encourage people, if you are listening, to just pause and go into my website and open the infographic, unless you're driving.
Good point.
Yes, so you can see while I'm explaining the infographic. I created the original back in 2012 as part of a course during my master's in special education degree, and it's evolved over time. And one of the reasons it evolves, my knowledge of the research is evolving, and also I'm constantly trying to help people better understand the messages in a one-page visual. And I'm really excited because I'm now describing it as a translational framework, and this is thanks to Dr. Katie Pace-Miles, who described it this way for me this spring and presented it this way at the AIM uh, Institute in March, and really it was just so validating for Katie to say this is translating the research. It's a framework, and it really is set out in a way that's easy for people to understand, because my focus way back when I first started, but continually my focus here is for classroom teachers, for learning support people, for administrators, and for parents and caregivers to really understand the complexities in a way that they can wrap their heads around it. So the ladder of reading and writing at the top of the translational framework shows that reading and writing are both important as part of literacy skills and development. And then the ladder itself on the left-hand side was drawn by Dean Stanton of Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And his art is throughout the new book that Jan and I co-edited, and delivering the message that I liken the journey to climbing up a ladder. It's the rungs of a ladder, and children are climbing. But very important are the smiles on the children, and I really feel very strongly about this, that it's our job as educators to ensure that the journey is enjoyable. But I also feel as a teacher, when I'm not enjoying it, my students are probably not enjoying it. So those smiles are really important. And it could be the success of skill mastery, but it's also just having fun. And when we look at early literacy, we're looking at little children. It's okay to have fun. I do feel the fun. I say I'm all about the fun. In the center of the translational framework, the four different colors here represent the ease of rewiring the brain. The research very strongly indicates that humans aren't born to read, we say, but for learning to read and write, the ease varies. There's a wide variation. And in the research, and I've started to use this much more myself, they refer to the continuous distribution or the normal distribution. And I think that's really important for everybody to keep in mind in these tumultuous times when people are really being bombarded with a lot of information and trying to figure out what to do. And this makes it clear that there cannot be a one size fits all, because our children vary in the ease at which they are going to rewire the brain to master this skill that our culture has decided is important, and I think is important. So the wording in here, and I'll just encourage people to go back and read it later, but the wording in here is representative of the instructional implications, and then the wording on the side. And the wording has been carefully chosen. And Jan actually was my sounding board for the last two revisions. And the purple arrow that says differentiation, systematically designed and data informed. Note, if you look at it, you'll see it goes from top to bottom. This is not just differentiation for one group. And clearly, we are going to have to differentiate from the beginning. This is not teaching everybody the same way and then going into differentiated grouping. So this is really important. And the wording was slightly rearranged in 2023 because I thought people are still not hearing the message, differentiation. And then systematically designed is also important, and maybe we can get to it in the conversation. But again, the word systematic has been used in conjunction with children for whom it's more of a challenge. But actually, when you look at the research on advanced readers, the little there is, and gifted programming, you're still systematically designing programming. And again, that's really important to understand for differentiation. It's not just, oh, well, we'll just, let those who can already read sit in the corner. And then data informed, and Jan will probably address this, but not just numbers, but observation. And I feel like we're in danger of losing teacher judgment or recognition of teacher judgment. And so this, I'd love Jan to speak to that later. And then the blue arrow, recognizing that there are environmental and within student factors that influence how children master skills and how we're going to differentiate our instruction, and also how we're going to work with families and caregivers and so on. So all these things are important. And I spent many, countless hours trying to explain it to people and writing blog posts and so on. And then, this needs to be a book. And that's what led to the book that Jan, I was so excited when she agreed to co-edit this book with me. And the book is full of information. And again, not everything is there because there's so much, you can fill a room. But I say to people now, make sure you read the book. When you're using this, people write me for permission, and they have to read the book because they have to understand the messages so that we're getting the correct information across. So that's the nutshell.
Yeah, that's great. So much more information than I knew about this infographic. So I'm so excited to hear some of the background of where it came from and all of that. I'm curious about, I wanted to jump right into these, I think that I say there's kind of 4 different areas on this continuum, although they blend together, right? So it's not cut and dry.
Yeah.
But those are just so important for me. I know as a parent, I look at this and I think, okay, my kid's going into kindergarten. I know some kids somehow before they get to kindergarten already know how to read, and my child doesn't. And looking at this, it's like, oh, that's okay. It's like he's on this continuum where he needs to be. It's not, there's very few students in that green that just pick it up quickly. And as a teacher too, it's really helpful to see this too, because sometimes you think, well, I did a really great lesson and I taught it really well, but not everybody got it. And it's like, that's right? Like there's different places on this continuum where your students are. And my question is, you have an entire chapter on this in your book, so there's a ton to say, but can you just give us an overview of, these 4 different areas on the continuum? What might need to look different for them in instruction?
Jan, do you want to go first?
I'll start. You can start from the top and go down, or you can start from the bottom and go up. But let's start at the bottom for this discussion, looking at those students estimated, and all of these percentages, of course, are estimations because we don't have, and we never will. All the researchers that look at how do we categorize children into the different groupings that do reflect ease of learning, it always has to be estimation because we're talking about human beings. But I really think Nancy has done a very good job in quite accurately estimating based on, sometimes conflicting research. But in the red area, the estimation on the infographic is 10 to 15% of children are going to have the most difficulty in this climbing the ladder of reading and writing for varieties of reasons, some of which we know from now decades of research has something to do with the way their brains were genetically formed and developed. They're born with perhaps a brain that works perfectly well, in fact, maybe extraordinarily well in most things, but one little aspect, and often a lot of that research is focusing in on the way the brain processes language or aspects of language, even narrowly down to how the brain understands and processes the individual sounds of words, phonemes. That is one of the characteristics that many researchers are comfortable saying, if that's in place to a moderate to severe level, we're going to call that dyslexia, or at least a characteristic of dyslexia. So the children in the red would include those students that many of us do refer to as having dyslexia or characteristics of dyslexia. But there are other learning challenges that will result in the children being in that red. And then the instructional implications. Is that what we wanted to talk about at this point, Melissa?
Yeah, that's great.
Well, for those children, the instruction, and it's detailed a bit in the infographic, but in detail in the book, that this what we've learned over actually 50 years or more of good, solid research about systematically designed, explicitly delivered instruction. Nancy pointed out that purple arrow indicates that systematically designed instruction that is has a scope and sequence, thoughtful, an order of presentation, sufficient examples. That's beneficial. Systematically designed instruction is beneficial for all and necessary for all students, no matter where they are. The children in the red, we have to be extremely careful about how instruction is designed. And then on top of that, we have to be extraordinarily concerned about how it's delivered. And when we think about delivery of instruction, that's where the term explicit instruction, sometimes called direct instruction, where we show the students, we model, we demonstrate what it is, the new skill or skill or knowledge concept or construct is very carefully presented to the children. And then the key to explicit or direct instruction is the guided practice, where the child works with a teacher, somebody in the teaching role, where we provide that amount of practice. And that's one of the differentiators between the children in the red and the other children on the continuum is the amount of practice, especially guided, but not independent practice, because everybody gets to independent practice eventually, but where the children in the red are going to need is extraordinary amounts of guided practice, where a teacher is there to encourage and scaffold, and yes, that's right, so let's now move on, or no, that wasn't right, so let's do a correction, or let's back up a little bit. That is the amount, sometimes referred to as the dosage of instruction. It's the same stuff. Everybody has to learn the same stuff or acquire the same stuff through explicit instruction or through experience of learning. We want to prepare all those children, no matter the causal factors of them being in the red. The research just continues to come in that says with carefully designed instruction delivered with delivered explicitly, and then monitored progress using that data to inform our decision. Should we slow down? Should we back up? Can we move on? Important for all children, but especially it's really, in most cases, really kind of a dosage issue. And then we move to the students in the orange, and it's really the same issues, but on a little bit of a light version. Some of those children too are challenged learners for reasons that may have neurobiological or genetic considerations. Others may be affected and need to move a little slower, or that their ease is going to be a little bit more challenging than some students for reasons we do not know. But that's where the observation that Nancy mentioned, we do need teachers to know about the full range of development and of children, so they can look for that. But we also want to be sure that all teachers have in their hands the good, well-designed, efficient, not time-consuming data collection systems that allow them to identify students' needs, pinpoint appropriate instruction, and then monitor students' progress along the way. So not huge differences between those red children and the orange in terms of what kind of instruction. It really does come down a lot to dosage, dosage particularly, and how much time in that step of guided practice before they can move on to independent practice.
Can I ask a question about the dosage? I feel like that's something we got questions about a lot in a previous podcast. We talked about this, and we actually gave some incorrect statistics. We were wrong. And I just have so many questions about the dosage, because I feel like, I love to connect learning to read to like sports. And if you think about how many times it takes to, in soccer, learn how to perform a corner kick that lands like right in the middle of the goal, some kids might really pick it up really fast, and they might just, 10 tries, 20 tries, right? Because they have already had instruction in where they plant their foot, how they follow through, where on their foot the ball hits, etc. Other kids may have had that same instruction, but just might not be able to do it yet. They're still really trying to manage what their upper body's doing, what their lower body's doing, how it's different, taking a corner kick versus taking a hard shot on the goal. And I just think that this dosage idea, I'm just wondering, is there a magic number that we don't know the number? It's just like that corner kick, right? It's just lots of practice, and some kids need more, some kids need less. And what I'm hearing you say, and I think you said it in the beginning, Nancy, is that observation is really important to think about how we move through these pieces, like where kids are kind of in these pieces of the ladder, or steps of the ladder, rungs of the ladder.
Right. Yeah. Thinking about the learning is the ladder image. It's climbing that ladder. Some kids are going to zoom up the top. Some kids are going to climb more slowly. Who those children are is the colored continuum. But
yes,
dosage is a huge conversation when I get together with my researcher friends. It is one of the things that we talk about a lot. And it's going to, there never will be a number. What we have to prepare teachers for is the fact that some of those children in the red are going to need what may be extraordinary numbers of practice, but even that will vary. We're never going to be able to say somewhere between 115 and 212 repetitions. We don't know that. It may be 300 for some, it may be 75. That's dependent, though, not only on who that child is, but their environmental support and the kind of instruction they are receiving. There can be, and we say in the book over and over again, there is no one program. There is not a magical program. There are certainly programs that are better than others, but even those better programs, you take the best ones in the hands of teachers who may be more or less skillful, the child is going to be moving faster than other children. There's so incredibly many variables. So teachers have to be very well informed. Teachers have to be very well supported. I'm a big advocate, as you all know, of coaching, and we need administrators to have this information. We need coaches. We need all the support in the world to do the best job we can, because we're never going to do it perfectly. Yeah, dosage is a big challenge, and there isn't a right answer, but we have to be prepared that some students, and Nancy's going to be talking about this when she talks about the children in the light green and the dark green, we have to be prepared. Some of those students need little or no amount of their dosage is maybe zero because they've already learned it. The children in the red may need literally 200 so but how in the world do we manage that and be prepared for that?
Right. And so I chomping at the bit here to say exactly what you were going to say or said, Jan. Thank you, because we always have to consider for whom. And when we talk about programs and materials, and there's a lot of conversation these days, and teachers are throwing out things that actually are appropriate for some children. And so I think we need to be really careful to not generalize. And whenever we're talking about for whom. And so I will talk about these areas, but one thing I keep saying to people that I really believe, and it's not just because I created this translational framework, but I really believe this needs to be at the beginning of every teacher training, because I'm worried that teachers are getting training that it's really directed towards one area. And right now there is a lot of focus on children in the red. And I've worked with children for whom learning to read is very difficult. So I'm not taking away their need. What I'm saying is, and Jan and I made this clear throughout the book, and our chapter authors did that we need to provide instruction based on need. And I actually believe it's a disservice to teachers to lead them to believe that everybody needs what children in the red and the orange need. Because when I first created my ladder of reading and writing, it resonated so well with teachers. I didn't create it to, do something like this one day. I had no idea. But teachers kept telling me, "This is my classroom. This is my classroom," and right now, a lot of my focus is on the green, particularly the dark green, because they're really being neglected. And there is one research article I often quote that I think says the word neglected, and so when I present, people come up to me after and thank me because they say, I teach kindergarten and I have a child who can already read, and I just wasn't sure what to do. And nobody talks about it. Nobody's recognizing the needs of this child. So we're really validating what actually is in classrooms. I realize classrooms vary. There are some districts that have a much greater percentage of children who are already reading than others. And so choices need to be made, but training needs to recognize this. We need to honor what teachers see, but also for new teachers, what they're going to see. And if we can start out saying, there is a range. You are going to see the range. Now, how do we support you? And this is where actually we could talk about it for hours, but this is where differentiation comes in, because we need to support teachers in, okay, how do we address this? So going to the light green and dark green briefly, you probably would agree there's far less emphasis on these areas. Children in the light green will read more easily, and often those are the ones that people talk about on social media. Well, my class has lots of children who are having no problems. Why am I supposed to teach all this? And so we need to honor that, and what really will support these children well. And the word implicit appears here. It doesn't mean that not everybody on the continuum learns implicitly, because there's been a lot of focus on that recently. And Jan was, when you were talking about repetitions, those repetitions will also be gained implicitly. So how do we track those? Because we don't know how many exposures they're getting and so on. but I put it here to get it into the conversation because throughout the editing and writing of our parts of the book, my own learning of implicit was increasing, and I feel like this was something that was not mentioned when I first started to read about learn about the research many years ago. And so I really am trying to get it in the conversation, and others are too, thankfully. But we were doing the book when it really wasn't part of the conversation yet. But so implicit here means more opportunities to learn on their own, to learn in small group. We're going to set up our instruction, and we're going to provide what is needed explicitly to enable implicit learning to happen as part of our instructional program. And whereas in the red, they're going to need much more guidance, as Jan was saying. So Mark Seidenberg and actually I think Stanislav Stahan, they both use the word bootstrapping. These children require far less bootstrapping. So why would we hold them back? We're, delaying them if we're holding them back. And then some children arrive already reading. I think, Melissa, you mentioned some who read early and easily, and I've certainly spent a lot of time reading the research on those children, and have experienced that myself, because both my children learned to read on their own before school, and I didn't know any of this.
It's like magic.
Nothing. Yes. And I didn't realize how extraordinary it was. And I also thought, that's great. Don't have to worry about their school. Well, actually, as the parent of advanced readers, I became very active, in grade 1, because their needs were not being met. But in the chapter on advanced readers in the book, I also point out 2 other groups. One is those children whose parents have taught them to read. And during COVID, there was a lot of attention to the teaching of reading, and a lot of parents were teaching their own children. And there's so much on the internet and so much information that I've taught to people, including researchers. Researchers say, well, yeah, I taught my own children to read before they entered school. They wanted to make sure they had that. So we need to be aware of children who are coming, who may not have learned totally on their own, like my children, but they're already reading, and we need to recognize that. The other group that I'm very aware of are children who are coming in from culturally, economically, linguistically diverse populations, who, especially economically, who the research indicates are more at risk for reading difficulties, but not all of them will have reading difficulties. Some of them may arrive already reading, but some of them just need a bit of bootstrapping. And I'm thinking of those who are intellectually above average, who are coming from backgrounds of poverty. We really need to move them along as quickly as we can. And so this is where people talk about equity, and they say, oh, we need to have equity. We need to, focus on children who are struggling. I'm saying, well, what about those children who come in from backgrounds of poverty, who don't have books at home, who somehow are already reading? Maybe their, family or caregiver or grandmother took them to the library. They learn to read very easily. We can't judge and, say that, no people from low SES backgrounds have no books, like some of them, so we need to be really careful. But the research does say that when children come from households that don't have a lot of money, the school is what's really important to provide extra enrichment, to provide the support that they need to move along more quickly, to provide extra courses to, so it's even more important. So if that helps not just cover the range, but cover the equity issue that is often part of the conversation.
Yeah. Thank you both so much for that kind of deep dive into it. I appreciate that. And I think that the natural place to go next is differentiation. I want to just kind of throw out a scenario because I think differentiation can be really tricky for teachers. Like Jan, you mentioned, if they don't have the support, right? I think remember myself, in my first year of teaching, people were talking about differentiation. And I was like, I don't even have this teaching thing down yet. I don't know how to change what I haven't even done yet. And I think differentiation is confusing if it's not well supported. So, I'm thinking if I'm a second grade teacher and I'm teaching a phonics lesson and I'm providing systematic, explicit instruction to my entire class, that I'm wondering if differentiation in that lesson could look like, okay, my students who I've identified as already getting the skill that I've taught, right? They got it immediately. Then they are moving on to practice something related to that skill. Maybe they're reading decodable books. Maybe they are practicing, maybe even reading less decodable books, right? Transitioning into trade books. Maybe they're doing other partner activities, like some fluency activities that they might be able to move on. Basically, I'm trying to shift them and give them something different than the other students, but potentially related. Then my other students, I can gather and maybe reteach and provide that dosage in a way that might be a different context or that makes sense for that group. Is that one way to approach differentiation?
In a whole classroom,
Yes.
that's what we've got to do. And how to do that when you've never seen it, you've just not seen that kind of thing. Many teachers are familiar with small group instruction, but that was organized around what we now have come to understand a faulty methodology of trying to match children to a particular level of book, and then they would go off and read those books at their just right level, and reading would then magically be happening because of that. Well, actually, the theory behind that, it was not all that bad, but it doesn't work because of many things. One of the things is we skipped over the systematically designed explicit instruction that some of those students are going to need. Just they skipped right to independent practice, and that's not what those children need. Some children can do that, but so many teachers have never seen that. So one of the misunderstandings, the way we move in education so often, is from one swing of the pendulum to the other. So we were doing small group instruction, and then teachers heard correctly that the way they were doing small group instruction wasn't working, but they said, oh, small group instruction isn't working. So, okay, a lot of people are misunderstanding SOR, this huge thing that people are treating real quickly and lightly. That SOR means you teach all the kids whole class until you have the MTSS tiers, and then you have tier 2 is something different. Tier 1 needs to be differentiated, but yeah, where do you figure that out? Well, we would just say to people, buy our book and read chapter 5. And chapter 5, and I say it sort of flippantly, but for many decades, I've had the opportunity to work with the author of chapter 5, Dr. Vicki Gibson, who I met when I was a professor at Texas A&M University, which is in College Station, Texas. And from early on, I remember people in my department of educational psychology saying, there's a woman here in College Station that runs schools for young children, and they're amazing, and you need to go see them. Her name is Vicki Gibson. So eventually I did. And I remember the very first day of going to her school, and she walked me around to see the different classrooms. And there were 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds. And she had them organized generally by age. And she was managing, the teachers were managing these children so that there was some whole class age appropriate instruction, and then children moving fluidly and purposefully to various areas in the room. The 3-year-olds were, going to different kinds of areas of the room than the 5-year-olds were. but how the children were moving around. And then what I saw for the older children, starting at age 4, were the academics that these children were achieving. The children were writing, they were reading, they were interacting verbally with each other, and they were managing and organizing their own bodies to move around and engage with others. I'd never seen anything like this. She says at the end of that tour, I said to her, "You need to write this down." And she has in different places, but we enticed her to write this down in chapter 5 of our book, and she did it. So there's an organization. She's done this for decades with some, and many of the children in her school were very high needs and very young, but this works. She's also taken her model in work that we did together to middle school and high school, and Vicki and I co-taught at the college level, and we did some of these things within our undergraduate college classes. You have to look at classroom organization first before you get to the differentiation of what do my dark green kids need, what do my orange kids need. That will come, and the whole purpose of doing this is so that you can figure out how to do appropriate instruction for all the students. But it starts with looking at how much time do you have? Is this a full day? Is it a half day? Is it 3 hours? How much time? Looking at different activities that you do want, and where is that going to happen? Organizing the room for those kinds of things, and that's what it starts at the beginning, organizing your time and then organizing the environment, which of course is going to look different for 3-year-olds or 13-year-olds, but there's not special furniture or special rugs, or it's just some spaces where the teacher can spend some time with some direct, explicit instruction for in a small group, that there's certainly time for the full class together, and then different areas or groups for the students to do. And then using data to form instructional groups that are very flexible. Vicki, from the beginning, you don't lock kids into the low group or the high group. You put students in instructionally appropriate groups, which may be appropriate for 3 to 5 days. And then they switch to a different group. And those groups get mixed because a child who's receiving direct, explicit instruction in some beginning reading activity, because they may be a child who's would be in the red or orange group, they need that kind of instruction. But when they're working with their peer colleagues, because of other skills they have, they can mix with the children, all the children, and do really well. So it's hard to summarize all of what's in that incredible chapter, but it's decades of proven step by step, do this. It really works. The payoff is huge. I do remember, but it's so new. It's so different. It's hard to visualize. I do very clearly remember Vicki taking this model into a middle school where it was a top-down decision. The administrator said, "You all are going to do this. You're going to organize your classrooms this way." And I can tell you, the middle school teachers, you can perhaps imagine, were not real eager to do this.
I was a middle school teacher. I understand.
Yes, yes, no, I do know that, Melissa.
That
So
is not what we do.
kids are all there, and you basically lecture to them, and you might read aloud together, but that's it. And so the reception was not warm. And one guy was especially really, not happy. And vocal about it. And at the end of the day, though, he was very honest, and he came up to Vicki and said, "I know I have to do this. I don't want to do this, but I'm going to do it because I'm told to do it. And then you're going to find out that it's not going to work with these kids." So he dutifully did it step by step and became a huge advocate, said, "My kids are happier than they've ever been. I have no classroom management issues anymore. The parents are happier. They're all saying, what is going on in your classroom? I'm having more fun teaching than I ever had before. I will never go back." And he actually has a picture. There's a picture on a book that she published about how to do this at middle school, and he and his classroom are on the cover of the book. So it is different. It's really different, but it does work. And that's one way, certainly at a classroom level, but another model for that allows for differentiation, especially when the range of your class is very large, is to think about doing more cross grade or reorganization. So if there's a bunch of children, or a handful, usually perhaps, of the kids in the dark green who are quite more advanced in their reading, there may be a few across several classrooms. Let those children be grouped together and receive the appropriate instruction, not just send them to the library and let them do, or put them on a computer. Those children deserve instruction, but we have to reorganize our schedules, our resources to do that. And I know Nancy has lots to add to this.
Thank you for bringing those students up. Yes, Vicky's chapter is so full of information on the management, and just a couple of notes on my experiences meeting Vicky, because when Jan told me about her, I've always been a differentiation fan. I thought, oh, I have to meet her, and I think we met at the beginning of COVID. We met via Zoom anyways, because I live in British Columbia and she lives in Texas. I did go to her school though, because I got myself there. But a couple of things that I think are really relevant to topics these days. Vicki talked about how the children were always talking in their groups, and there's a focus these days on we need to have our children communicating more and talking more, and maybe they aren't talking enough, and then we have whole class and you look and they're all sitting there, and if they're talking one at a time. And it really struck me when Vicki talked about this opportunity to converse with each other. That is so important, that comes out of this, a small group experience. And actually, it didn't go in the book. I didn't see it in Vicky's chapter, but when I read her work and went to her school, I noticed one of the jobs, it has different jobs for different children, which is great, teaching them responsibility. And one of the jobs was, I think it was noise regulator or something. I thought, oh, my son would have loved that. Like, excuse me, everybody's getting too loud. So people say, oh, it's going to be noisy. Well, you manage it. And that's, so many people have kind of raised reasons to not differentiate. And Vicky's chapter is all about, well, this is how you deal with it. This is how you deal with that. The other thing that Vicky talked about was the development of self-regulation skills. And again, this is getting a lot of attention these days. And she told me that when her students moved to other schools, the principals and the teachers at the other schools would tell her, we know they've come from your school, Vicki, because they are able to self-regulate at a higher level than, and so this brings me to saying, to differentiate, we need to collaborate, and we need to, if you're going to, and I hope read chapter 5 and apply those, we need to apply those, as Jan said, collaboratively within a number of classrooms, so our students aren't having to relearn a different approach each year. And for students with ADHD, that's really important to have that consistency. And the other thing that I have seen where it falls down in terms of cross-grade is leadership and scheduling. Leadership needs to really be careful with the scheduling and put this as important. Jan mentioned teachers were differentiating, and I really, again, want to honor that teachers realized that the variations, and we're trying to do this, and we need to recognize their gut. There was, this is what we need to do, and we need to pull that back under, this quote SOR, and use really good management strategies to do it. One of the things when Jan talked about different children doing different things in different areas of the classrooms, in our book, we have a chapter on technology, and technology, of course, is just getting, well, I want to say better and better, but I don't know. Sometimes it's kind of scary what's happening, but certainly there are a lot of advantages in terms of technology for the classroom. And there are lots of ways you can differentiate using technology. And for people wondering, well, is there research for differentiation itself under the science of reading? I refer people to the work of the late Carol Connor and her colleagues. Study after study after study showing we need to differentiate and we need to take into account the child's skills and the characteristics. And actually, her studies showed that if we hold children back and require them to, say, receive phonics instruction they don't need, they're actually delayed. And that actually aligns to what the research that I found in the gifted ed field, that these students will be delayed. And I realized I didn't talk about instruction for these students in the dark green, but when Jan talked about grouping students based on need and those students who are already reading, within their groupings, they can have, for example, comprehension instruction using more complex texts. They don't need to read decodables. The books that are for beginning readers. We need to make sure we're not giving them what beginner readers need or may need, depending on where they are and so on. So the complex text and then comprehension questions. And there are programs, and I won't mention names, but there are good programs that are being studied that provide steps. And so it's back to that design that Jan and I talked about. These programs are designed for comprehension for advanced readers, and a number of them will be above average intellect, and they need higher level thinking. They need complex demanding tasks, and they need rigor, and they need to be challenged. So this is what we can provide using a differentiated approach.
Yes, I really want to ask about assessment. I know you've mentioned it a few times, but I just want to make sure we touch on that before we go, because in order to do anything that you all just talked about with differentiation, you have to know where your students are. Yes. And I know I've seen the question a lot from teachers where, well, if we're not doing this leveled, if we're not finding the levels anymore, then what do we do? How do I assess my students to know where they are? So I know we're low on time, but if you can give your top tips for assessment to make this differentiation even
possible.
Happen. Yeah.
It's not going to happen, and it's not going to be successful. No, instruction is not. So yes, let's dive into data, which we, of course, do include in the book. There's a chapter. I actually am the author of that chapter. I love writing about data in a way that is accessible and useful. That's one of the places. I mean, talking about data and reliability and validity and all of this stuff gets really complex really fast. And somebody does need to know that. But when we get down to the classroom level, the teachers need to have the tools that have proven all the reliability, validity. And I think most teachers these days, what do we do? So let me go right to that. The heart of that question, Melissa, is what do we do to replace this leveled reading instruction that we are trying to move people away from, because it didn't work for the vast majority of children. And what do we replace that with? What we replace it with the evidence, and it's decades of evidence. We just have to figure out how to do it. But the evidence is we design instruction on a needs-based skills. That's how we group students. Skills-based instruction around the skills involved in learning to read and becoming a skillful reader, learning to write, becoming a skillful writer, and spelling. So we need to look at all of those areas, but we need to do it in a way that is quick and efficient. And we're often these days talking about, it's a framework we've been using now for a few decades of screening children to quickly make categorizations of risk, that those, if they're used appropriately, we choose good screeners. They are super efficient, quite accurate at saying, here are your kids who have little or no risk, here are your children who have some, and here are your children who are at high risk. Then, and a mistake that a lot of schools are doing, a lot of people have embraced screening instructions, but they then use that as the placement into skills. And those assessments were not designed to do that. I love talking about the fact that screening assessments are thermometers. They say you have a fever, you have a high fever, you don't have a fever. But it doesn't tell a parent or a physician, what do you do about this fever? That is the skills diagnostic assessments, which break down reading, writing, spelling into the skills that are somewhat sequential in their acquisition. So we can, do you know your letter names? Do you know your letter sounds? Do you know how to blend? Do you know how to decode words? Can you read phrases that are decodable primarily? Where are you in this ladder of skill acquisition? And we want those assessments. And there are assessments that are quick and efficient, and we don't need to give full batteries of assessments to all the children. Those diagnostic assessments are very aligned with, in the medical world, those are like x-rays or MRIs or biopsies or those kinds of things. No physician gives all tests to all kids or all patients. We give systematic, and we use the results of our observations of our students, our knowledge of who they are, what is their language development, what is their level of attention abilities, as well as skills. So we then differentiate our assessments as needed. Those children in the orange and the red are going to need more skills assessment because they have more needs, and we have to pinpoint our instruction. Then the third major category of assessments that are useful for differentiation is the progress monitoring assessments. And some of the same assessments we use in the screening and in the diagnostic can be used for systematically differentiated progress monitoring. More assessment needed for the children in the red and the orange, who are likely receiving instruction that we would call tier 2 or tier 3, along with their good tier 1 instruction. But it is that those are the highlights of the differentiated assessments that we need to use. It should not overwhelm any school system. It shouldn't take huge amounts of money or time to do this. And it should, if we're doing it right, it results in actionable, useful information, not just spreadsheets and colored charts that, like, okay, that's nice, but we just spent weeks doing this, and now we don't know what to do. That, if that's going on, that's not the right. And hopefully the chapter that I wrote in the book, that's chapter 4, right? That would give a start. And all of our chapters are meant to be accurate and helpful guidance, but we also know that we wrote them specifically to be short overviews of this area. So each of the chapters on all the topics, Vicky's chapter, my chapter on data, all the chapters on the different exceptional needs, children with developmental language delay, children who have comprehension disability, children who are intellectually disabled, children who are deaf or hard of hearing. We do address lots of exceptionalities. Each one of those short, accurate, up-to-date, evidence-based chapters is an overview, but each chapter also then has resources, what to do next, additional places to go for people who want to dig a little deeper.
Yeah. And I just want to give a little plug for that chapter 4. There's so many practical visual explanation samples. I think that's really helpful to see. So if you're listening and you're thinking, I'd really love to see this, the book gives really tangible, here's a sample, here's an example. And I appreciate that so much, so we can all see exactly what it is. I know teachers always want to see exactly what we're talking about and a sample of it. And so chapter 4 really shows that.
Just a reminder for our listeners, the title of the book is Climbing the Ladder of Reading and Writing, Meeting the Needs of All Learners. And like we said, we'll share where you can find it. And thank you, Jan and Nancy, for being our guests today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.